Good morning, everybody. I'm Michelle McLean from Casey Cardinia Libraries, and it is my pleasure to introduce Heather Arnold, who is the president of the Cooey Rump Historical Society and our much beloved and much missed retired local history librarian. So we are very pleased that Heather's agreed to continue presenting local history and family history subjects for us. And I hope you enjoy this series. This is the first of 4 weeks. So if you haven't booked into the other sessions, I encourage you to go to the library website and book into the subsequent sessions. And I know you're going to get a lot out of it because Heather really knows her stuff. So Heather, I'll pass over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Michelle. Yes, indeed, I was local history librarian. It was just my dream. I love being local history librarian, but now I'm retired. I still love being retired as well. So, you know, it's good pluses and minuses. I'm going to share my screen and we should see the presentation. What is this here? Get rid of that. Sorry, I've got to find where it's beginning. Slideshow. Get rid of that. Slideshow. Right, so you can see, can you all see, hopefully?
Yes.
Family history and introduction. Yeah. Okay, so we're looking at family history today. This is just an introduction. As Michelle said, there's 3 other sessions in this. Next week, we'll be looking at family history sessions on the internet, family history websites. So on the internet, so lots of free websites. The week after that, we'll be looking at Ancestry and Find My Past. And I have to tell you that I love Ancestry, so I'll be rabbiting on about that. But, you know, Ancestry's got some good points and some bad points. Find My Past is also good, so we'll be looking at those programs. And the 4th session, we'll be looking at Trove and other newspapers and how to research your family history using Trove and other newspapers. And once again, I have to say how much I love Trove as well. So you'll be hearing me go on about that as well. So family history, this is this little picture here is my great-grandma, Eleanor Hunt, and her daughter, Ada Sheldon, and her daughter, my great-auntie, father's cousin. What's her name? Nell Sheldon. So that's a lovely little photo. So family history is essentially, why can't this change there? Family history is essentially hatches, that is births. That's my husband's birth photo. Matches, that's his parents' wedding. They married on Boxing Day 1942. And John, my husband, was born 1st of January 1944. And just over a year later, and his sister was born 1st of January 1945. So it was a tumultuous few years for the couple, and then the marriage broke up in a divorce. And this is dispatches. So this is just a remembrance card. So hatches, matches, and dispatches, births, marriages, and deaths. And that is essentially what family history is. So, and it all starts with you. This is a 4-generation photo of John's, great-great-grandmother and various great-aunts. I love these multi-generational photos. So hopefully that, you know, you'll be able to trace your family back at least 4 generations and even more. So to start off with, I recommend that you write down everything you know. So start with yourself. You have to start with yourself. You can't start with William the Conqueror and work back. You have to start with yourself. So write down everything you know, who you are, when you were born, who your parents are, when you got married, all your children, etc., or whatever you want to write about yourself. Then you go on to your parents, who they are, you know, when they were born, when they were married, other children like your siblings, where your parents grew up, perhaps where they went to school, all those sort of things, like where they went to school, what they did as a job, where they lived when they were growing up. They sort of help build a picture of your family, and they also help give you hints about where to go and look for more information. And then I suggest you do the same thing for your grandparents. If you know anything about them, who your grandparents were, if you know anything about their marriage, if you know where they grew up, if you knew where they lived when they were married, all those sorts of things. So write down everything you know, and then when you know what you know, you can start filling in the gaps. But that's a good way to start the whole process off. So you may wonder how you're going to record all this. So you can either do it on a bit of paper or a family history software program. So we'll go look at the bit of paper first, because you could just write down some bit of foolscap paper, but I would recommend that you use something like an ancestral chart. So you get these freely, you download these from Ancestry. So Ancestry you can use in the library, and you can just, under forms and charts, you can just download one of these. And if you just start filling in the information with yourself here. So this is you here, and your father and your mother and your paternal grandfather, paternal grandmother, then your maternal grandfather, maternal grandmother, etc. So a chart like this just helps you keep all your information in place. So you can write here, like that's your name, when you were born, where you were born, when and if you were married, where you were married. No, of course, if you died, or this may be for someone else who's already passed away, of course. And so anyway, this is sort of a good way to keep your family information together. The other thing you can do, you can use in conjunction with this chart, is a family group sheet, also available through Ancestry. You can just download it for free. And this is where you keep your information about family groups. So husband and wife, or we're still using those terms. So that say that's your grandfathers. Put your grandfather here and your grandma here, and then you list all the children. One of these children would, of course, be your mother or your father, and the others would be your aunties and your uncles. So this keeps family groups together, and you're more than likely, well, you are of course going to have many of these. So you'd have one of these for your dad's parents, one for your mum's parents, and then you might do another one if you want to go further back for your grandma's parents, your great-grandma's parents, etc. So you can end up, if you do go down the paper route, having many of these sheets. However, it does keep all your information in some sort of order. Tells you add things like when they were born, when they were married, when they died, all that sort of information, and it just sort of keeps your information together. So that's what I would recommend if you want to go down the paper route. But it's easier than just writing what I do. Talking to your mum, and you start writing down the back of an envelope, and you get an old bit of scrap paper, and in the end you think, oh golly, all these bits of paper everywhere. So it's probably easier, I feel, to start being organised on proper bits of paper to start off with. Or you may decide that you want to use a family history program or software. So these are just a few suggestions. So all these slides, Michelle will email out my presentation to you, so you don't need to write them all down. So you could use Legacy. Lynn Bradley, who was the president of the Family History Group, she recommends Legacy. You can download a free version, and then you can then later on upgrade if you wanted to a paid version. But or Family Tree Maker, Family Historian. There's various family software programs, but Lynn does recommend Legacy. So they're programs that you download onto your computer and they stay on your computer. Whereas you can also add your family tree to say Ancestry or Find My Past. So the benefit of using Ancestry and Find My Past, if you subscribe, is that they give you hints all the time. So because they're a database full of so much other information, you put your grandma's name in and they come up with all these hints to say, is this your grandma? You can add this information to your tree, or else you may find it helps you connect to other trees as well. So if you've got if your fourth cousin's on a family tree, some of your family tree overlaps. If she's got her family tree on Ancestry, well, you can sort of link into that and get information. So the benefit, that's the benefit of Ancestry and Find My Past. The disadvantage is, of course, you have to keep subscribing to it forever and ever and ever, or you lose access to your family tree. The other thing is you can make it all private, but you have to decide whether you want ancestry.com and findmypast.com to know everything about your family, but that's a decision you need to make. But of course, if you have legacy, that just, or family tree maker, etc., that just sits on your computer, and there's no one else has access to it. So the other option is Family Search. So Family Search is the database of the Latter-day Saints, the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints, or the Mormons, as we call them sometimes. And Family Search have a database of family history information. So what the years and years ago, what the Latter-day Saints did, they went round to all these little churches all throughout the world and microfilmed all their records, took them back to Salt. The records stayed with the parish, the church, or the parish or the institution, but the microfilms went back to Salt Lake City, where they were all indexed, and now all those indexes are available on Family Search. It's totally free. They've got this amazing collection of information, and it's well worth looking at. So some of the stuff is the same as Ancestry and Find My Past, but some of it's different. So, you know, Family Search is well worth looking at. The other great thing about Family Search is if you have what I call non-Anglo, like if you're not, like I've got all English ancestors, but like, you know, if you have ancestors from other places, Family Search and Ancestry especially are quite good for those sorts of things. But so you can put your family tree also on Family Search, and that won't cost you anything, but because it's a free database. But you know, once again, it's a very public tree, so you have to make the decision, you know, whether you want to have a program that sits on your computer that no one else can access, or whether you're happy to have it more in a public place. So that's how you record the information. You either on a bit of paper, which I recommend these sheets, or else on a family history program. Now, that's just what I just said here. So we'll just go to the next screen. A few hints. Women are always listed with their maiden or their maiden, such a quaint little term, isn't it? Their maiden or their birth name. So whatever the name that when they were born, that's how you list a woman. I recommend you use a full name. So if they were christened or baptized, or, you know, really they were registered as Joseph, well then put Joseph, not Joe, because it can get a bit confusing otherwise. If they've got a middle name, use a middle name as well. That's especially so in the case of where, you know, 4 generations are all called William, but they've got a different middle name. It just helps you distinguish between generations. And the most important thing, of course, with family tree programs, they usually have an auto date suggestion, so you don't have a choice. But if you're writing down on bits of paper, just be consistent with the date. So always say, put it 4th of May, 1976. If you put 4/5/76, of course, if you're an American, that's April the 5th. If you're in Australia, that's the 4th of May. So, and once you get back generations, you may get a bit confused whether 76, 1876 or 1976. You just really need to, whatever way you do your dates, just be consistent with them. So you always know that it's 4th of May, not April the 5th, etc. So that would be my main thing. And the other thing about the names is that it's worth putting, you know, some families, they have, you know, the child is christened, you know, Robert Michael Smith, and they call them all, you know, Jimmy or something like that. You know, there's some families that use a lot of nicknames, so it's probably worth putting the nickname in as well, because if that's how you always think of, you know, if your father's always called Jimmy, but he's actually was registered as Robert Michael, you know, you get a bit confused as to who they are. So you can always put Jimmy as a, you know, like in inverted commas or something, so you at least know who you're referring to. The other thing I was asked once, what do I put in my family tree? One woman said to me, you know, do I have to put the children of my ex-husband, like her ex-stepchildren? And the point is your family tree, you can do what you like. If you want to put, I mean, clearly you adopted children, you'd put them down, or foster children, but if you want to put them on your family tree, you put them on your family tree. It's your family tree. You know, no one can tell you what to do on it. So if you want to include all your stepchildren because you consider them your own, you know, your own children, well, put them on the tree. You know, that's all right by me. It's your tree. Remember, see, family history should be fun. So you don't want to get too sort of tied up into this, oh, you know, should I put this child on my tree or not, you know, or I suppose if you disown your child, you can take them off your tree, but, you know, that's up to you. So what we've done now is we've gone through and we've written down everything we know. So now you need to decide, now you need to work out, how do I fill in the gaps? So how do I add information? How do I find information I don't already know? So here's a number of suggestions that we'll go and look at in more detail. So old photographs, family Bible. People talk about a family Bible. I mean, I don't know who's got a family Bible in their family because we certainly don't, but apparently some families have a family Bible where all the births and deaths, etc., of the family used to be written down. So you may be lucky to have access to one in your family. Family papers, e.g. marriage certificates, old newspapers, school certificates, employment papers, relatives. Ask your aunties and your parents and your uncles and long-term family friends. Long-term family friends are especially sometimes useful, you know, because they sometimes have information that your parents aren't willing to tell you or something like that. You know, it's just interesting to get a different perspective. If they've known you for a long time, they may have information about your family. DNA tests, Symmetries, online databases such as Ancestry, Find My Past and Family Search, and birth deaths and marriage certificates. So we're looking in a bit more detail at these sources of information. Family papers. So this is just a photograph that we've got at home. We're very fortunate in our family. We have a lot of photographs still, and this was sent by Frederick Weatherhead to his sister, Mrs. Ted Sheldon of Lineville. So he was at Tynong, as you can see. He sent this in 1914, and that's his son, that's young Kenny here, who was 2 years, 7 months, and this is young Winnie Weatherhead, who was only 8 months old. So this is apart from the fact they didn't put their full names on, this is an interesting little postcard that tells you how old the children were. It tells you, well, we know he's Frederick Horatio Weatherhead, and I can't remember what his wife's name was, but it doesn't really matter. We know they were at Tynong because that's where it's written from. And we know, and it was sent to, I know that's his sister, but it was sent to Mrs. Sheldon of Lineville. So it gives you a couple of addresses. It gives you ages and names of children, and it's also a very cute photo. So you may be lucky that some of your family photos have got this abundance of information on the back. In reality, of course, what you find with family photos is it just says like mum, or it might just say auntie, or it might just say on holiday. So, you know, sometimes you find there's not much useful information on the back of a photograph, but you're sometimes lucky. The other thing on the front of the photograph, of course, is not only the photograph, of course, but you get here, as you can see here, the this is Glennie, the photographer, and he was in Sale. So this sort of gives you a clue as to where your ancestors were living at the time. And also there's books around about photographers and when they were actually practicing. So if you can't date your photo any other way, you can perhaps date the photograph by the age of the clothes, or by the fact that, you know, that Glennie, for instance, you might find out from a trade directory that he was in Sale, for instance, working in 1890 to 1900 or something. So this is my great-grandmother and my great-grandfather and their little son, who's that's my great-grandfather there. Oh, that's my grandfather. That's my grandfather. Yeah, who's born 1892. And this is poor Annie Glover. She had this little one here. Then she had 3 other little girls. And then she died. She was pregnant when she died, 8 months pregnant. And she was in a horse jinker accident, and then she died. It was such a tragic thing. I mean, she left like this little girl that died, and 2 other little girls, and my grandfather, and he was a boy. So, you know, like, it's such a lovely photo, but really, like, in a few years later, she was sadly dead. And anyway, family tragedy. Sorry. Anyway, that's a nice little photo. So, but what it tells you, I got sidetracked there. Sorry. What it tells you is that, you know, they were in Sale at the time. So that gives you some hint as to where they were. So that's photos. So you may get clues about your family from photos if you're lucky enough to have family photos. This is from Lucy Rouse, is my great auntie, and this was presented to her as a souvenir of the coronation of His Majesty King Edward VII on June the 26th, 1902. So Avonshire they lived at Stratford at the time, up near Sale. So that just once again gives you some idea as to where the family was at that point in time. Family stories. So it's worth talking to family members to find out what they know. Sometimes they don't know anything, and sometimes they're not going to tell you anything, and sometimes they can't be bothered telling you everything. You can't make anyone tell you their story, but it'd be nice if they did. But some people are not interested in family history. It's worth writing down family stories. Sometimes family stories end up to be incorrect, but sometimes they're totally correct. And sometimes it's a bit in between. Sometimes, so it's always worth writing down the family stories when you can, and then trying to prove or disprove them. And just because you disprove them doesn't mean it wasn't valuable. It may just mean, because people remember things differently. So if I talk about my childhood and my sister talks about her childhood, like I remember things she doesn't, we remember things different ways. So just because the family story, it doesn't prove to be correct. It doesn't mean, they may think it's correct because people remember things differently, and they're still interesting to record. In the olden days, not so much now, but family members would often may have covered up a scandal. So especially like with the child born out of wedlock, which virtually no one cares about these days. So of course, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, a child born out of wedlock was more of a scandal, and they may cover up the fact that the child was born out of wedlock and delete that from their story. So, you just have to remember that. The other thing that used to happen, not so much these days either, was the term auntie or uncle for your parents' friends, which of course, so you might think Auntie June is actually your auntie, when in fact it's your mother's friend. So you might get a little bit confused about that. So they're just sort of things you need to remember when you're interviewing the family. However, it is still worth talking to your family to see what they know. Oh, DNA test. Now, this is a new modern way to trace your family history. So these are just various places you can get done: Ancestry, Family Tree, 23andMe, MyHeritage. So for around $100, you could find you have some relations you didn't know, or you could see results that surprise and distress you. So it's a bit of a, I did my ancestry here through my DNA, through ancestry.com, and found out, no surprises there, that I was 50% English, 24% Scottish, 9% Norwegian, 4% Swedish, and Welsh, bit of Irish. So I like to think with 9% Norway and 4% Sweden and Denmark that I'm actually 13% Viking is what I like to tell people. So I'm nearly a full Viking. So, this was no surprise to me because I knew that, we only basically had English ancestors. So actually was a bit of a surprise. I didn't realise, but I presume coming from Northern England, it's not surprising that there is a bit of crossover with the with Scandinavia. And also a lot of my ancestors used to were seafarers, etc. So that wasn't at all surprising to me. But the other thing you get if you haven't done your DNA is a list of other people who've done their DNA through the same company, through Ancestry, and what your relationship is. So I found out that my mother, my sister, and my brother were, of course, my mother and my siblings, and then I had first cousins from both sides. So I knew that my father was actually my father. But what you may find out is that your father isn't your father because your mother had an affair. What you may find out is that your father had a child to another woman, and then you have a half brother or a half sister somewhere. There's a whole range of things that you may find out. You may find out that if your father isn't your father, you have to be prepared to think, well, because apparently I've heard that 1 in 10 people, the person on the birth certificate as their father is not their father. So, you have to be prepared that you may find out a result that, is very upsetting and very distressing. So you have to decide whether your $100 that you spend on your ancestry or whatever, DNA test is really worth it in the end. So the only other thing about it is that if you were donor conceived or adopted, well then you may find out you have other siblings around or aunties or uncles or something. But of course, there's no guarantee that if you met them, if they were willing to do that, that you're going to have a happy ever after story. So, you know, it's cheap entertainment, but it could be, it's opening a Pandora's box. So you have to make the decision whether you want to go that way or not. There's apparently a Facebook group called DNA NPE. NPE is short for not parent expected. So anyway, it's all fun and games until it goes wrong. So anyway, so that's DNA. So another place you can look for family information is Symmetry. So Jane Vivekananda from the Narrawarren Family History Group does a very good talk on Symmetry. She did one last year, which I think is on our YouTube channel. It's well worth listening to. So the thing about Symmetries is that you can get some really great information. So Begin Graves and Find a Grave are sort of commercial sites, and they just take photographs of cemeteries all around the world. Australian Cemeteries is a database of cemeteries and has, and if there's an online, it just brings all the records together, so it's quite useful. But you have to remember that, so the Australian Cemeteries website for, say, Bunyip Cemetery has got some photos. Sometimes you find photos, sometimes you don't find photos. Sometimes there's only photos but no transcriptions. Sometimes the names on the database are taken from headstones, and sometimes they're taken from the registers. So you may have someone, if you're sure that you know your ancestor was buried at, say, Bunyip Cemetery, and they're not on the entry under australiancemeteries.com, it may well be because they don't have a headstone, in which case you still need to contact the cemetery trustee for more information. The other thing about cemeteries is that the Springvale Botanical Cemetery, what we used to call the necropolis, and the Fawkner Cemetery, which is the second oldest crematorium in Melbourne, all their records are online. So it's worth having a look around it. So there's various reasons why you should be looking at cemeteries, because people who died, say, recently in the last 25 years, they're not listed in the indexes to birth, deaths and marriages, but you may find that you'll find that if they're buried at a cemetery or somewhere, or if they're cremated, even if they're cremated at Springvale and their ashes are no longer at Springvale, there would be a record on their website. And you'd be surprised how many people were actually cremated at Springvale. My own grandfather was cremated at Springvale in 1955, and he had his ashes in a wall there, even though all his family were at Bunyip. So, I mean, I would have expected he would have been buried at Bunyip with the rest of the family, but for some reason he was cremated. So, you know, it's always worth, if you're looking for a missing link, it's always worth having a look at some cemetery records, especially in the area where you think the family came from, and you may just well find you a missing person. So there's other information on a headstone which tells you, you know, when they were born, when they died. It might list family members. They might list grandchildren buried with them. There's various things there. However, as Jane would have told you if you'd heard her talk, sometimes people on a headstone aren't actually in the grave, and sometimes the dates are wrong, and there's all these other things. So it's not, you know, it's not 100% accurate all the time, but it's a good source of information. Local newspapers. So historical societies have a lot of old newspapers. So I'm from the Koorup Swamp Historical Society, and we have digitised the Koorup Sun from 1918 when it started to 1981. So, but of that, the only part that is on Trove, that is digitised and accessible by members of the public, is the war year, is the First World War year. So like just 1918, because the precursor of the Koorup Sun was a Lang Guardian. So what I'm saying is that we have the full range of the Koorup Sun at the Koorup Historical Society, and many other historical societies also have local newspapers and may have digitised them, but they're not yet up on Trove. So it's still, or not digitised, microfilm them. So it's certainly worth if you're looking for a newspaper, going to the Historical Society in your area, in the area you're interested in, to see if they have any old newspapers. State Library of Victoria has a full range of newspapers. Due to legal deposit, people were required to deposit or to send a copy of their book or their newspaper to the State Library. So they had the full range of newspapers there, some of which are, most of them have been microfilmed. Some are on Trove, some aren't on Trove. It's a bit of a, it's worth looking at the catalogue. If you are interested in looking at newspapers, the State Library of Victoria, hop onto their catalogue or email them first, because many of them are in storage, so you'll need to give them notice to actually get it to you at the State Library of Victoria reading room. And Trove, of course, which will be part 4 of my talk, and is a project of the National Library of Australia and has digitised Australian newspapers from 1803. It is just the most wonderful resource. So of course, you'll find, of course, birth notices, death notices, marriage notices. If you're really lucky, there's a lot of country newspapers, so you might find a report of the wedding, who was there, the bridesmaids, what they wore, what presents they got. You might find an obituary. There's a whole raft of information you might find about your ancestors on Trove. I'd suggest you just put the name of your person and the name of the town they grew up in or something, and just see what you get. Because even the major daily newspapers such as The Age and The Argus had a lot of information about country towns in those days. A lot of what would be considered trivial information now about, local, lots of local reports about local activities in towns. So, you may be lucky and you might find some information. That they also have other newspapers. So like there's a Dutch newspaper that's been digitised since the 50s. There's the Methodist Spectator, which was the newspaper from the Methodist Church, that's been digitised if you have Methodist ancestors. The Advocate, the Catholic newspapers, all been digitised. The Jewish Herald, the Hebrew Herald, if you've got Jewish ancestors, they've all been digitised. So there's lots of different sort of newspapers that have been digitised, all on Trove. So it really is worth looking at, but I'll go on more about that in 3 weeks' time. The other newspapers which we'll look at also in a few weeks' time is Papers Past. We might look at that next week, actually. Papers Past, which is the New Zealand version of Trove. So you often find that members of your family who came from England or wherever sometimes went to New Zealand first, or went to Australia, then went to New Zealand, and vice versa. There's lots of swapping over between us and New Zealand. So Papers Past is the New Zealand version of a Trove. So that once again, they had the same range of birth, deaths and marriage notices and obituaries that the Australian newspapers had. The State Library of Victoria also has, if you get a State Library card, which is free, you can get a State Library card, and then you can get access to various other newspapers like the British newspapers, American newspapers as well, like historical newspapers. So, I can't stress enough the value of old newspapers in searching your family tree. Right, now, so there are all sources of information to help you fill in all the gaps, if you get what I mean, about your family. So there's also online databases, which are a mix of official information and user-contributed family trees, some of which are just a load of rubbish, but some are really good. So there's Family Search I talked about before, which is a Latter-day Saints. There's Ancestry Database, which you all heard about. You see it advertised all the time. That's available at the library. And Find My Past, once again, we subscribe to that as well. Casey Cardinia Libraries subscribes to that as well. Or if you're not a member of Casey Cardinia, most public libraries in Victoria subscribe to these databases as well. Family Search, as I said before, you can put your family tree up on that. And so if I put my family tree up, you put your family tree up, and I think, oh, that's wrong. You can actually, there is a dispute mechanism, I believe, where they try to mediate and make sure that the right information's up. Ancestry is often, I've seen family trees on that which are like rubbish, and then they're just repeated again and again and again, you know, so you can't always take it for gospel what is on the family trees that are actually on Ancestry and Find My Past, but you know, they're always a good starting point. And sometimes you find some are incredibly accurate and have lots and lots of sources, and some are a bit dodgy. But you know, you just have to go with the bad. And sometimes you find out. I use I do a lot of research, so I'll put a lot of family trees on Ancestry because for people I'm researching. And one of the great things about using Ancestry and Find My Past, but I use Ancestry more, is that as I said before, you put a name in and you get lots and lots of hints. So you can then decide whether the hints are worth it or not. Some of the hints are do not actually apply to your person. Some are people of the same or similar name. But it does help you build a picture of the family, and it keeps all your, if you're doing a lot of research on people, it sort of keeps all your information on that person that I write about sort of together in one spot. So, you know, you have to make a decision. But Ancestry has so much information. We're looking at that in 2 weeks' time. And Find My Past, they've got military records, birth, deaths and marriage records. They've got newspapers. They've got the census. They've got electoral rolls. They've got so much. You know, they really are worth investigating. And if you can't afford, or you don't want to subscribe yourself, just make an appointment, go to the library and look at it at the library. You don't even need to book one of our computers. You can take your own laptop, and as long as you log into Ancestry, you need a library card through us. As long as you log into Ancestry through our website, then you'll get it for free at the library, and you can spend all day there. In fact, I believe you can get through our Wi-Fi. You can actually use our Wi-Fi in the car park if you don't even want to come in. If you want to sit in the car all day, you can look at Ancestry all day through the library.
Heather, I can confirm the printing. Yes, we do have Wi-Fi printing now, but depends which library you are at as to whether you can access it from the car park.
Oh, right. Okay, right. But you can access the Wi-Fi in the car park. Most car parks, can you?
Not a Bunjil Place. It's too far away.
Oh, okay.
Cranbourne, only if you're parked on the same side of the building.
Okay, well, there's a hint if you want to use it after we're closed at midnight. Hang on. If you're desperate for an Ancestry shot at midnight. Yeah. Anyway, but it's better to come to the library, of course, because we're air conditioned. So that's where you can get lots of information. As I said, both a mix of official and user contributed trees. And then there's official information. So official information are things like government issued birth, death and marriage certificates. So it is, as I say here, the official source of information, but not always correct, as we'll look at in a minute. So the indexes, which you can freely access, give you the registration number of the certificates, which makes it easier and cheaper to purchase the certificates. So there's a whole list here. This will be in the handout that Michelle will email out to you. These are all the online indexes. So that they're all the same, but they're all different. So if you look up the Queensland one, that would actually give you the actual date of the person's death or birth. So day, month, and year. Whereas Victoria just gives you the year. And then in New South Wales, it only gives you, so if you're looking for a birth, it only gives you the parents' first names, not their last name. So you don't get the mother's maiden name, whereas in Victoria, you get the mother's maiden name as well. And also in Victoria, they're adding more and more information on. So now often you find that with the death, the index of the deaths, it actually tells you the who they were married to. So you get the wife's maiden name as well. So in Queensland, you get the full names. They're all a bit different, but they're really worth looking at because sometimes if you're just trying to find like the peripheral members of the family, like say your great aunts or something like that, sometimes the indexes are good enough to make that to do that family tree. But if you want to actually get the certificate, you have to pay your $20 or whatever it is, and then you get more information. Before we go on to that, actually at Tasmania, look at this next week, I'll give you the link to that. In Tasmania, the Tasmanian archives have a lot of the early marriage, birth, deaths and marriage records already online. So you get it for nothing. So that's really good. But in Victoria, as I say, you have to pay $20 for a certificate. So why would you get a certificate? So, I mean, you don't need to get a certificate, but there is a school of thought that, of course, if you can't prove your research, well, then, you know, how do I know that it's true or not? So if you're just doing a family tree for your own sake and you don't care about sources, you don't need to buy these certificates. But if you do buy a certificate, what you might hope to find on a birth certificate is the place of birth of the baby, the parents' names, their occupation, their age and birthplace, and when and where they were married and the older siblings. On a marriage certificate, what you might hope to find is the place and date of marriage, the birthplace of the couple, the occupation and age of the bride and groom, and any previous marriages, plus the parents' full names, including the mother's maiden name. And a death certificate would tell you date, place, and cause of death, parents' names, when and where buried, and name of the spouse, when they were married, any children, and depending when they come to Australia, how long they've been in the colony of Victoria. So that's the information that you may gain from a marriage certificate. But of course, you don't always get that, because I was looking at a marriage certificate the other day, and I know she had 4 children before she was married, and it lists no children in the actual on the actual marriage certificate. So the column that says number of children, it's got a dash, and I know she had 4. So you know, they do lie. People lie about their age, especially in the old days. You had to be 21 to get married unless you have parental permission. So they were 17, 18, 19, and they say they were 21, or else they were 45 and they told their spouse they were 35. So they lie about it all the time. Or they, you often find that their birthplace, especially, that doesn't always correspond to the birth certificate, because they think they were born in Tynong, they're actually born at Warrigal, for instance. You know, I mean, but generally you get the sort of it is worth spending, if you can afford it, money on certificates, because you do often get information that takes you back a step further, especially if you can get information about the parents of them. So now, so you've done all your research and you still can't find what you want. So why is this? So it could be because the name's spelled incorrectly. So Thulis was my mother's maiden name. It is often written, so because what happens was a child is registered, and then so the parents were illiterate and couldn't read or write English. They say that the surname Thulis, and the registrar writes it down as Thulis because he writes it down or she writes it down phonetically. So and because the parents can't read or write, they don't know that it's written down incorrectly. So or else it could have been that it's the same with a marriage certificate. If the people were illiterate, the minister may have written it down phonetically rather than the correct spelling. So think about other ways to spell the surname Thulis or Thulis. The event may not have been registered. Some people, especially illegitimate children, were not registered. Some people couldn't get round to registering it, because in the olden days, if you had to travel, to the next town, which could have been 15 k's away, it was sometimes hard to get to the registrar to register an event. And the indexes. So we're looking at the indexes, and then indexes are transcribed. So first of all, they're transcribed from the original, then transcribed again, and it's easy to make a mistake to see a T as an F or an F as a T or something like that. So just sort of think about other ways you might have spelt the name. Family stories are incorrect. So you may have thought that the marriage took place after the baby, but not, and it actually took place before the baby was born, vice versa, I mean. So you're looking at the wrong date range. So, that may be the reason why you can't find a marriage or a birth. And people lie about their age, people lie about their previous marriage status. So you might find they've lied about their previous marriage status, that sometimes the marriage certificate's in the birth name of the woman, or sometimes it's in her married name. So you have to keep looking at different things. People use other names, as we said before. They're Chris and Robert Michael Smith, and they call themselves Jimmy for some reason. Or the event took place interstate or overseas. So there's a whole raft of reasons why you can't find what you want. So to find what you want, think outside the square. So once again, like with pronunciation. So one of the good things about Ancestry is that you can search with a phonetic spelling. So Soundex, they call it. You can tick that box and that searches other names that sort of sound like that name. So, but in the Victorian indexes of the births, deaths and marriages, there's no sort of there's no leeway like that. That database doesn't search like that. So if you put the incorrect spelling in, that's what they're searching for. They don't give any other options, and there's no sort of like options to try other names. Used to be on the CD-ROMs, but not anymore. So you look at phonetic spelling. So Rouse is my maiden name. So it's sometimes spelled with a W, sometimes spelled with a U. Eleanor, Helen, Eleanor, Nell, they're all the same name. Oh, no, they're not all the same name, but they're often used interchangeably. So you're looking for Eleanor Smith, and in fact, she was registered as Alan Smith, or sometimes she was Nell. So, you have to sort of think about those sort of variations. And then, of course, there's Gardner, Gardiner, Smith with an I, Smith with a Y, all these sorts of variations of spelling. So it's really just try your search once again with either Gardner spelled different ways, or a very like Jim or John, or no, what's John? John. What's the nickname for John? Jim, wasn't it? That was James. Anyway, Jack and John, those sort of names. Sorry. Or use the truncation. So Ancestry, you can use truncation, where you put an asterisk in to replace one or more letters. And it's the same with the Victorian Index of Birth, Deaths and Marriages. You can use the truncation symbol. And that's where you might use it for like the Gardner name, where you'd put the truncation symbol where the I is, and that would actually pick up all those three variations of the spelling. Also putting less information. Some people, like unless you're looking for John Smith, I've seen some people on Ancestry and other databases, they fill out everything. So surname, first name, second name, third name, surname, and then date of birth and mother's name. They fill everything out. But of course, if one of them is incorrect, well, then you're not going to get a result. So sometimes it's worth putting in less information. So put the name you're looking for and delete the year, or change a year, or delete the place of birth, or put in the person's name and the mother's maiden name, or the person's name and the mother's first name, or something like that. Just use various combinations of fields, and sometimes you'll pick it up. So sometimes you won't, but just because you've searched once with one search strategy doesn't mean you're not going to find the information if you search again. So it's always worth having another go and just trying, as I said, different variations of the names. One of the good things about Ancestry is that because it has a database of births, deaths and marriages all over Australia, you can sometimes pick things up through that you can't pick it up through and because their search strategy is a bit more flexible, you can sometimes pick up information there that you can't pick up through the indexes of birth, deaths and marriages. So it's worth trying a different, various search strategies and combinations of fields. Now, this is just an introduction, very quick introduction. For more advanced research, join a family history society. That would be my recommendation. And this would give you access to advice, shipping records, convict records, overseas records, and much more. So in this area, of course, we have the Narre Warren District Family History Group, and they're based at the Cranbourne Library. Like all of us, they're being closed, but I think they're reopening again. They're open on Tuesday. I'm pretty sure they're reopened again now. There is density limits, but
Yes,
And they're taking bookings for time slots. So if you check their website, you'll be able to find that out.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. So you have to make a booking. But hopefully once all this settles down, this COVID settles down, that, they'll be open like they normally were. But they've got so many resources. They call themselves Narre Warren because that's where they started. But they're not just Narre Warren, not just Casey Cardinia. They got resources from all over Australia and all over the world, and helpful volunteers. Family History Connections, they're at Blackburn. They used to be the AIGS, Australian Institute of Genealogical Studies. And they're, once again, like them and the GSB, they are also being open and closed, but they also have lots and lots of information, lots of resources. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, of course, that's not a group, I mean, unless you're a member of it, that's not a genealogical society, but they have their, as I said, their familysearch.org website, which is full of information. It's just an amazing resource. So that's worth looking at as well. Other resources, internet. So next week, I'll be looking at hundreds, oodles, 5 pages it is, 5 pages of internet resources, mainly free, about tracing your family history, lots of different ones. Public libraries, of course, you can get free access to Ancestry and Find My Past. And also we have books, magazines, free internet, all those things. So it's worth checking out your local public library. Historical societies, as I said before, have a huge range of resources, including family information, old newspapers, old photographs, school magazines, I don't know, just all family history society, all historical societies, of course, are different. So it just depends where you are, but it's worth contacting the historical society in your area to see what they have. So some historical societies are very organised and charge you for information. Others, like Cura, we don't charge anyone for information. But, you know, it depends. They're all run by volunteers, so you just have to see what they've got. Before you go and visit their museum, just make sure they're going to be open. On the Royal Historical Society of Victoria website, there's a full list. You can search for historical societies, just put in the area that you're interested in, and it will tell you if there's an historical society near you, sort of near the area that you're interested in. So I can't recommend enough that historical societies are really worth having a look at for tracing your family tree. And finally, so civil registration began in England in 1837, and previous to that, it was recorded at a parish level. So the English birth, deaths and marriage records, which you can get on Ancestry, and some of them are free, Ancestry, Find My Past, etc., and also Family Search. They only started 1837, because before that, there was parish records, like parish records at the church. So that's why the Latter-day Saints and are quite good in this respect, because they microfilmed and indexed all these parish records. In Ireland, civil registration began in 1864. So before that, parish records are the only source of information. So it is a bit easier searching countries that have had civil registration, that is government registration of births, deaths and marriages for a long time, rather than parish records, because parish records means you have to actually go back to the little village where they came from, where civil registration, it was centralised, and there's a centralised sort of database. It's highly unlikely you can trace your ancestry back to William the Conqueror. If you can get back to 1800 with accurate sources, you're doing well. And do not assume that people in the 19th century did not move from place to place. Do not assume there's only one person with your ancestor's name in a village. It's not uncommon to find cousins have the same names. Do not assume that a person is your ancestor because they have a name used in your own family. And do not assume that family stories are correct, because often they are. And often they are not, I mean. And finally, family history is addictive and fun. So have fun tracing your family tree.